There was a roundtable. Roundtables in and of themselves, I cringe whenever I hear that word because they're always so unproductive, but this one particularly so, and it had to do with the fentanyl crisis. Let's talk about it in our segment, Unbelievable. All right, every 6 years, Senator Maria Cantwell emerges from her cocoon in Washington, D.C. and pretends to care about the issues facing Washington state. And of course, we're closing in on her reelection year in 2024. And so she's making herself known more often. And she came to the Seattle area to do a roundtable on the fentanyl crisis, which I think is a great thing. I think everyone should be focused on and talking about ways that we can deal with the fentanyl crisis. She was joined by the mayor of Seattle, the chief of the fire department in Seattle, as well as some families who have personal tragedies to tell, and some members of federal law enforcement, again, to talk about, okay, what's going on here? How can we address it? I have no issue with that, although I think roundtables are stupid because I think it's a lot of politicians who sit in a little semicircle and for the news cameras and discuss whatever their talking points are going to be, and then nothing ever actually gets done. So I think it's dumb, but if you're talking about it, I'd rather you be talking about it than not talking about it at all. But the issue is that the whole point of the roundtable was to sort of figure out, okay, why is the fentanyl crisis worse in Washington state than anywhere else in the country? Our rate of fentanyl overdoses is much higher and is growing much faster than anywhere else in the country. So that's a legitimate question. Okay, fentanyl is an issue in more places than Washington state, but it is particularly bad here. It's a particularly deadly crisis here. And so during this roundtable, Senator Maria Cantwell asked the group of experts, quote unquote, before her why that was. Why is the fentanyl crisis worse here than any other state in the union? And I was going to sit here and play for you all the responses to that question. But I thought I'd just list them for you because, frankly, I don't think we have that much time. Rather than anyone sitting there, again, which was law enforcement, it was first responders, it was politicians, it was families, rather than anyone there stating what the obvious answer to that question is, I want to list for you all the other reasons they gave, which I'm not saying these reasons aren't contributing factors to why the crisis is so bad, but they don't speak to the heart of why the crisis is worse in Washington state than anywhere else. So among the reasons, fentanyl is very cheap in Washington. Washington's position on Interstate 5 makes it a convenient place to traffic drugs. Congress hasn't declared the fentanyl crisis a crisis at all, which would help us get support from federal agencies. So that's making it so bad here. More federal grants are needed for treatment. Medicaid rules don't allow for payment for certain treatment services. What other reasons? Federal regulations on methadone are too tight. There's not enough treatment beds. So here you've got this group of people gathered to discuss the fentanyl crisis, and they are throwing out everything under the sun to explain why the fentanyl crisis is worse in Washington than anywhere else. Not one of them offers up the most obvious explanation, which I know all of you are absolutely screaming out loud right now. And that's because we have made sure that there is virtually no consequence for using the drug or trafficking the drug in Washington state. I've said it before. Why would you not traffic a drug like fentanyl in Washington state, where police are all but prohibited from pulling you over? Why would you not use drugs out in the open like fentanyl in Washington state when you're never going to get arrested for it? You're not going to spend a day in jail for it. We have established an environment where there is no fear of consequence. That's why the fentanyl crisis is worse here than any other state in the union. That is the obvious answer. It is the common sense answer, but apparently it is not the politically palatable answer. I mean, think of some of these answers that were thrown out to explain why Washington has the highest rate right now of fentanyl overdoses in terms of its growth. More federal grants are needed for treatment. Okay, well, that's a federal issue. That doesn't just impact Washington state, so that doesn't explain it. Medicaid rules don't allow for payment for certain treatment services. Again, federal issue. That doesn't explain why it's the highest in Washington state. Federal regulations on methadone are too tight. Okay, that's a federal issue. That doesn't explain why Washington State is sitting on its own little death island when it comes to fentanyl. Washington's position on Interstate 5. You know, there are 2 other states along Interstate 5, Oregon and California, that also have significant drug crises, but they're still not as bad as Washington State. So again, that doesn't answer the simple question. Congress hasn't declared it a crisis, which would help get support from federal agencies. Again, if Congress declared it as a crisis, that would apply to every single state in the union. Since Congress has not declared it a crisis, that also applies to every single state in the union, not just Washington. That does not answer the core question of why it's worse here than anywhere else. There is only one explanation for why it's worse here than anywhere else. It's because we don't care that people use it here. Our politicians don't care that people sell it here. The party in power is busy actively passing and proposing legislation to take it easy on people who do these things, to make life easier on criminals who peddle these deadly drugs to people in our communities. And not a single freaking soul sitting at that table has the courage to muster what is true. And we expect a roundtable like that to solve the issue. How many times have we said on this show, you cannot solve a problem that you refuse to properly identify the cause of? And so all that roundtable did is make me even more certain that if the same people stay in charge in our state, we are going to head down the exact same trajectory.